Hello and welcome to Mindscapes, our series of conversations with men and women whose ideas, vision and philosophy define our contemporary world. My guest today is one of the world's most outstanding Western scholars on Hinduism. He's often been described as being an Indian in an American body. He's written extensively on Indian traditions of Veda, Ayurveda, astrology, and a whole range of issues associated with the Indian heritage, the Hindu Indian heritage. I'm delighted to welcome Dr. David Frawley. Dr. Frawley, namaste. You have, in some ways, been responsible for articulating the Indian heritage to the West and to India itself. There's a great deal of debate and discussion on this whole issue of Indianness. What is it to be Indian? What is an Indian identity? What is it for you? How do you see this Indianness of India?
Well, I think that you have here a tremendous continuity of the literature and the culture. And that culture itself is very diverse, but it has certain characteristics. It has a certain spiritual orientation. It has an emphasis on dharma. It has a spiritual orientation towards sadhana, yoga, various meditational practices. And it has a very broad view of culture, unity and diversity, unity and multiplicity, and an integration of art, science, and spirituality under this greater dharmic orientation.
And yet in the contemporary debate, this is a major issue as to we should need to look and explore our diversity through a uniquely Indian perspective, an Indian umbrella. So do you have a sense of what that might be apart from this diversity?
Well, first of all, India is the only real ancient civilization that has managed to endure the course of time. Much more so ancient Egypt, ancient Babylonia, ancient Greece are gone. But the same practices that went on in those cultures, like the Murti Puja, the worship of images, the temple worship, is going on in India today.
To what degree might this be a romanticized version, a vision of India?
Well, to a great extent it is a romanticized image, or I would say it's an image of a part of India, or even more appropriately I would say it is the image of the soul of India that is still struggling to emerge in the modern age. Because India as a civilization was under close to 1,000 years of foreign rule, and particularly under the British rule there was a systematic attempt to undermine the older institutions and values of the culture. And also under the foreign rule, a lot of inertia set into the society, and a lot of backward social customs went on that didn't reflect the older and more dynamic civilization that was here. So I think that spiritual and progressive India is still there, but it has hardly emerged. It is still, coming to the surface, but it still remains the most dynamic force in Indian civilization today.
Much of your writing and work has enabled a presentation of aspects of the Indian heritage that have the greatest value in shall I perhaps describe it as personal transformation, the techniques that we may access, whether it's sort of Ayurveda or yoga, meditation, and the ways in which we can make that available in perhaps even sometimes a secular context. The work of yours that I'm most familiar with is Ayurveda and
Yes.
the mind. How does Ayurveda look at the mind?
Yes.
And what is the value of that perception at the time when Western science is certainly looking at the mind as a biochemical complex? So you recently have the U.S. Surgeon General's report which says that all mental illness is a question of biochemistry, not very different from the case of, indigestion or a virus or a common cold or something. You take a pill and you can be fine. What is the Ayurvedic view of this?
Well, first of all, the whole Vedic tradition is aiming at self-realization as the goal of life, and self-realization as an interchange in consciousness or enlightenment, realization of our divine nature. In the Ayurvedic view, we recognize that there is an integral and organic relationship between the body and the mind, but that also there's a higher self or spirit that transcends both the body and the mind. It is that higher self that we're truly seeking. To discover that higher self, we need a certain calm, or what they call the quality, the guna of sattva, at the level of the mind. When the mind is in a peaceful and silent state, it can perceive a higher reality. But in the Ayurvedic view, we don't reduce, or we can't reduce the mind simply to biochemical reactions. Certainly, as in Ayurveda, food affects the mind, the impressions we take in through the senses affects the mind, the environment affects the mind, but the mind itself is its own entity and at a certain level transcends the body, not only in dream but also in the after-death state. So the Western world has been too engrossed in the material aspect of reality, and they're looking at the mind externally. But even with all the psychiatry and the use of the drugs in the Western world to deal with the mind, you have a phenomenal explosion of mental and psychological illnesses in the West today. The biggest epidemic in terms of illness going on today in the West is depression. It's estimated that fully half the people over the age of 50 are suffering from some sort of depression, and at least half of these will end up taking some antidepressant drugs. And these drugs do help, but they are not eliminating the problem. And people who even take these drugs realize that without some other form of lifestyle change or meditation change, that the real quality of their lives and their thoughts will not change.
What are some of the approaches that Ayurveda would recommend in tangible, practical terms for diseases of the mind, let's say something like depression? How do you begin to diagnose and treat it if you're an Ayurvedic practitioner or a doctor and I come to you with depression?
Yes.
How do you begin to handle this?
Well, in Ayurveda, we like to look at everything in a holistic way relative to the entire human being, which is body, mind, and spirit, and all aspects of our life and behavior. So there we started at a physical level with certain dietary changes. There's certain lighter foods, more spicy foods. There's certain lighter eating habits that can help at a purely physical level. We also look at the exercise the people are doing. If we have a very sedentary lifestyle, then that also creates a certain quality of depression, or the guna of tamas, inertia. Very important is the impressions that we take in through the senses. You know, the impressions we take in through the senses feed the mind, just as the food we take in through the mouth feeds the body. And if we're taking in very dulling and disturbing impressions through our senses, then our mind is naturally going to get dulled. So there are many forms of sensory therapy through visualization, meditation, music, color therapy, aromatherapy. We can change the energetics of the mind, and that is what Ayurveda is looking for, practical tools to change the energetics of the mind. The mind is connected to the breath. Certain forms of pranayama are helpful. People who are depressed will be breathing very shallowly or forgetting to breathe. Circulating the prana through all parts of the body-mind system also increases health and happiness. And of course, meditation. If we can bring the mind to a silent and calm state, the mind will naturally heal itself. But to facilitate meditation, we often require certain mantras like Om, Aim, Hreem. Certain mantras will change the energetics of the mind. The mind is a sound pattern. We change the sound pattern behind the mind, and this can change any inertia, any blockages that lead to depression or other types of reduced or disturbed mental functioning.
The mind is a series of thoughts at one level, and I think people who suffer from mental ailments, illnesses, are uncomfortable with the thoughts that come up and the ideas that come up for them. And frequently these are based on experiences in childhood, of trauma, or what have you. And that has pretty much been the Western approach to retraining the mind, is to go back to the source of conflict and to try and resolve that in some way. How does the Ayurvedic tradition or the Indian tradition reconcile those imprints that the mind has received and are influencing thought today?
Well, this whole yoga and Ayurvedic tradition recognizes that there are these prime tendencies, the samskaras or the vasanas, that make up the mind and that are responsible for our karmas. And of course, traumatic experiences, anything that threatens our life, tends to create a samskara. So what this tradition aims at is the whole science of creating positive samskaras. So the Ayurvedic view is that to eliminate a lower samskara, you need to create a higher samskara. And to have a meaningful life, we have to have regular, meaningful, higher samskaras, whether it's a daily meditation routine, whether it's eating very sattvic food at a regular period, whether it's certain spiritual retreats, going to various tirthas and temples. There's a whole science of samskaras that's in this entire Hindu tradition, and cultivating these higher samskaras will reduce the negative. In the Western tradition, merely exposing the negative samskara doesn't necessarily eliminate it. It's making the patient aware of their pain, but it's not necessarily reducing their pain.
You've also done a great deal of work on Vedic astrology. And traditionally there has been an intimate relationship between Ayurveda and astrology in terms of being able to diagnose ailments and prescribe treatments. Astrology is viewed with considerable skepticism by the Western scientific establishment, and yet, of course, sort of is an inherent, intrinsic part of our traditions in India. What is the basis of astrology?
Well, first of all, the basis of astrology is that there is a meaningful movement to time. There's a certain rhythm or order to time. Each day is going to be different relative to certain positions of the sun, the moon, and the planets. So the Vedic idea is that what's happening to us at an individual and a species level is also going to be reflected at a cosmic level, this adidaivic level, through the movement of the stars and the planets, and through understanding these harmonic interchanges and this entire movement of time, we can adjust our life accordingly. For example, you have a weather report that tells you how to deal with these atmospheric changes going on. There are also certain greater psychic and cosmic influences through the stars and planets that we need to deal with. And science tells us how much the sun and the moon affect biology and psychology. Astrology just extends this principle to the other planets involved. And even modern science today, with its quarks and quasars and black holes, is not getting very far from astrology, and it's recognizing there are certain influences that can affect us beyond time and space or ahead of time and space. So I think we are getting close to the point where there can be some validation for the influence of astrology. But it's not a fatalistic system. Like the weather report is showing us certain influences that are going on. If it's going to rain, you use an umbrella. There are certain things we can do. There's a way to master and understand our karma by being aware of the forces and how they work.
Why is it so difficult to access a good, reliable astrologer?
Several reasons for that. First, because the astrology has not had a good reputation in this country. People haven't supported astrology. They don't pay astrologers properly. And secondly, as something psychic and spiritual, it's easier for quackery and false imagination to come into astrology. But there are many good astrologers in India today, and many of them who have a good scientific bent. For example, my friend Dr. K.S. Charak is also the head of surgery for a small Delhi hospital, as well as being a very accurate and profound astrologer. So when people who have both a scientific and a spiritual view come into astrology, I think they can bring tremendous knowledge. But when astrology is marginalized and when it becomes sensationalized, then that form of astrology unfortunately gives astrology a bad name.
A very essential part of the Indian tradition have been sort of two ideas, and you have used one of them, has been the idea of sadhana, and the other has been the role of a guru, of a teacher. What for you has been the role of a guru?
Yes.
And what do you see as the role of a guru?
Well, first of all, in all aspects of life, we have teachers. You know, some people today say you don't need any gurus. And my response is that is the case. You don't need school teachers. You don't need music teachers.
But a guru is something more than merely a teacher. Yeah.
But on the first level, the guru as a teacher is a very necessary phenomenon. Now, when we get to the spiritual level, we need more than a teacher who's going to give us information. They're going to be conveying to us a higher state of consciousness. For that, the personal example becomes more and more important, and the simple teacher role becomes less and less important.
How do you evaluate, how do you judge a guru as being someone that you might surrender to?
Well, I think there's first, out of a true teacher, there's a certain magnetic heart quality that connects us to them. And of course, there are different paths. We may be attracted to different teachers in different ways. But there's a certain heart quality of consciousness, of love, a certain almost type of intimacy, but at a soul level that puts us in touch with the entire meaning of our lives. And I think the true teacher also, there's a certain sense of friendship and kinship and compassion. What Ramana Maharshi said, for example, around a great teacher, the first thing you will feel is a certain quality of peace that puts your doubts to rest.
Yet there have been so many people who have been misled, as it were, by false gurus. What are the risks of that happening, and what would be your recommendation to someone seeking the path?
Well, the risk of false teachers are not only always there, I think almost all of us will have to go through at least one false teacher to find the true teacher. So I think the important thing is to set forth in motion a process of aspiration and sadhana where we are seeking the higher truth and devoting ourselves to certain practices. If we create our own magnetic heart energy of spiritual seeking, that will gradually draw to us the different types of teachers that we need. So sincerity on the part of the aspirant is a very important thing. And we also have to be aware of false imagination. Spiritual transformation is about the evolution of consciousness. It is an eonic endeavor. Someone who offers us instantaneous enlightenment, that things that our life will change suddenly and forever. This appeal to almost the get-rich-quick scheme in the spiritual realm is where a lot of the trouble comes up. We have to be very sincere, very patient, seek peace rather than run after experience, and seek an inner heart connection rather than just run after famous personalities and their charisma, because charisma can also be created from a purely rajasic or a purely egoic level, and have our own internal connection, faith in ourselves, and an internal connection with the divine. And I think if we have that, a path will open up for us, but it will take time, and it may not necessarily be in the form that our outer mind would like it to be.
You inevitably point to the aspect and the processes of sadhana, and there are numerous sadhanas available to us, and that is a part and the strength of our traditions. You have also written extensively on yoga as a sadhana. Yoga, to most people, is apparently a process of physical postures and techniques to be preceded by the yama and the niyamas, the ethical rules and modes of conduct. And you find frequently that most teachers and most processes tend to exclude the aspects of yama and niyama. What are the dangers? Why is that ethical system, that framework, so important before commencing a sadhana?
Well, first, I think it's been our American contribution to limit or to emphasize the asana or the physical aspect of yoga. And then we see that physical aspect of yoga being re-imported back into India. Classical yoga, even through Patanjali, the main definition of yoga is a practice of meditation, not simply a practice of asana. Now, in any endeavor, we have certain basic values, a certain lifestyle is necessary to support it. So yoga needs certain values and a certain lifestyle. And this is what yamas and niyamas teach us, whether it's the truthfulness, whether it's the ahimsa, whether it's the shaucha, the purity. In order to really develop at the level of consciousness, we have to have the lifestyle, the daily activity, the food, the impressions, the associations, the relationship, the proper character. Yoga is about developing energy, but what character, what person, what vessel is that energy coming into? If you don't have a good vessel, it doesn't really matter what you put into it. So preparing the vessel is as important as the techniques that are used to produce something for that vessel.
Obviously, this sort of the creating of an appropriate vessel for the practice of yoga is of extreme critical importance. What are the dangers if this is ignored?
Well, the dangers is that the practice of yoga is increasing our energy and increasing our thought power, and that can also occur at an egoistic level. So if the proper vessel isn't created, the same practices of yoga can create a stronger ego. And even in the tradition, it's held that the asuras also practice yoga up to a certain point, the negative hostile forces, because through concentration of mind, through energization of the prana, they can do more. So that is the main danger.
The sort of, at one level, the objective of these processes is a calmer mind and for a person, I suppose, to be happy, no matter how you describe happiness. But inherent in this is also the cultivation of a system of values,
yes.
of love, of compassion, of the recognition of interdependence, and a whole range of issues that make humans human in that sense. What are the techniques that cultivate these values that we sort of identify as human values?
Well, they're more than human values. They're the whole sense of dharma, which is the sense of unity on all levels of the universe, and the recognition that once we recognize this conscious being, not only in human beings, but also in nature, also in all the plants and animals, that cultivates a higher sense of compassion within us. So some sense of values is behind all the yogas, but particularly the fundamental practices, the bhakti yoga, or the cultivation of devotion, is not just about love of God as some abstract entity, but love of the divine spirit that is everywhere in nature, recognition of the divine mother that exists in the earth, recognition of the divine spirit that comes forth from the sun. And then the foundational practice of all yoga is karma yoga, because life is fundamentally action. And the foundation of karma yoga is seva, or service. Action is not something that we do just for ourselves. Our action is interdependent with the entire universe, just as the breathing, the eating processes are going on. We're partaking of the entire universe. The universe is also moving through us. So this foundation of karma yoga, I think, is essential to really bring these higher values into yoga practice, so that your yoga practice is already a form of service. It's not simply something you're doing for your own personal gratification.
And help me understand this relationship better between sadhana and practices and the changing and the transformation of the mind that might develop these values of love and compassion.
Well, sadhana works on different levels, and because through yoga we have to address the entire human being. So the body, the level of asana, that will also change, you might say, the level of thought and awareness at a physical level. Changing the diet, a lot of our negative psychological patterns which are rooted in the subconscious mind, are caught in various food cravings. The breath, how we breathe, is connected to how we use our emotions, how we hold our energies, how we move our thoughts. By changing the breath, we can change these factors. The whole range of sensory therapies, particularly sound and mantra, we can change the energy field of the mind. We can change the stream of our subconscious thoughts, so that when we sit down to meditate, the mantra comes up, Om Namah Shivaya comes up, instead of, oh, woe is me and what happened to me yesterday. And then in meditation, we can actually transcend the mind. So yoga and Ayurveda are providing us tools on all the different levels, and sadhana is the practice on all these different levels, merely to try to sit down and meditate without dealing with the breath, without dealing with your thoughts, without dealing with your values, without dealing with your diet, seldom works, because you have not created the lifestyle and the values to support it. Our lifestyle is the field in which we grow these plants that are spiritual development. If that ground is not cultivated, then even if you put the best seed in there, it's not going to grow.
Meditation is a widely used word now, and described by so many people representing so many traditions. What would you consider to be sort of the essential ingredient, the essential motive of meditation?
Well, meditation occurs on many levels, and I would also discriminate between meditation techniques and the meditative state. Meditative techniques are used to prepare the mind for meditation, which is a very essential thing. I would describe the state of meditation as bringing the mind into that concentrated and calm state, particularly this idea of the ekagra chitta, the one-pointed mind. Once the mind is brought into that calm and concentrated state, solutions to the problems of life naturally fall into the mind, almost like, like the rain falling or like a certain drip of water coming in. There is a certain state of mind we can arrive at in which the solutions to life, the answers to life's problems comes. But that requires a tremendous preparation. So the preparation for meditation is as important as meditation itself. But meditation proper requires that we do have this concentrated, still, and silent space in the mind.
What do you feel personally at this point in your life is the direction of your personal sadhana and your personal seeking? You have written extensively, you have done a lot of academic research, you have been a practitioner. Yes. What remains your personal seeking?
Well, first of all, I like to take an integral approach because I believe we need all the help we can get. We should cover all of our bases on the body, the emotions, the mind. In my own personal approach to sadhana and meditation, I take a threefold approach of pranayama, mantra, and more formless meditation. Because I find that pranayama is a very important way of internalizing the mind as a form of pratyahara. It also gives us the internal energy so that when we close our eyes to meditate, that we don't fall asleep. Secondly, the use of mantra. Most of the problems people have in meditation is they get eaten up by their subconscious thoughts. Now, if we do regular mantra practices, and of course there are many that can be done, I have certain special ones that I do, but if we do regular mantra practices by changing the sound pattern of the subconscious mind becomes our ally in meditation. And then for meditation proper, there is, first of all, the practice of self-inquiry, which is particularly what Ramana Maharshi taught, and this whole process of introspection, examining the meaning of our lives, which can occur once we brought the mind into this sattvic state. And then the other aspect of meditation is surrender, or the devotional aspect, where we surrender or open up to this higher divine reality, which is also the same as our higher self. So I try to take that kind of practical and integral approach and have a number of tools. For example, if my mind gets sleepy, I may go back to the pranayama. Or if one mantra is appealing to me, I may hold to that particular mantra until something comes out of it. Or if you naturally fall into a nice meditative state, you just simply let it be and flow with it. So it's like a dance, it's like a tapestry, you have various tools, it's like building a house, it's like cultivating a garden, growing flowers. So once you've done that cultivation in the mind, when you open your mind, or you close your eyes and look within, it's like entering into a vast garden in which there is always things growing and developing, as opposed to just, looking within and discovering all this blankness and darkness.
David Frawley, thank you.